This is the Parents in Sport podcast. Amazing guests, honest conversations, topics that matter.
Welcome to season 5 of the Parents in Sport podcast. I am your host, Gordon McClelland. I'm delighted to be joined today by sports psychologists and authors, Dr. Alison Maitland and Jenna Ashford. Thank you both for joining us on the show.
It's great to be here, Gordon.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this one because I think today's topic helps all of us. Having read your latest book to look at it to, I guess, help the work that we're doing, I then found myself really looking at it myself and thinking, oh my goodness, I could have done with this at numerous points over the last few years. But I just want to start by allowing our listeners to find out a little bit more about yourselves. So, Alison, can you just tell us a little bit more about you and your background?
Yeah, I always say I've got a bit of a mongrel background, actually. I've got a career in business, in human resources, and then the last 20 odd years, you can't see me on here, but I'm old enough to have done another 20 years of working as a sports psychologist in a range of both businesses, so bringing sport to business, but also with some sports teams. So netball's an area I work in a lot, rowing, and other sports as well.
Fantastic. Jenna?
Awesome. So yeah, I sort of started out in sport, really. So hockey was my sport. Played a lot of hockey, and I suppose through my experiences there, I became really interested in psychology, in the role that mindset played in sort of performing at your best and enjoying your sport as well. So went on to study sports psychology, and I worked with Alison in business, taking some of those lessons from sport and psychology into sort of organizations, and obviously work with sports people from all different sports, work in education as well. And I suppose relevant to this podcast, I've got a 7-month-old baby, so I'm just starting out on the parenting journey as well.
Brilliant. Well, I mean, congratulations on that. You'll certainly enjoy it, Jenna, because everything you know goes out of the window. So I've got 2 children. I live and breathe this every day, and I reckon I mess it up every single week when I talk to parents about what we should be doing. And I think you can take some safety in that. There is absolutely no such thing as a perfect sports parent. So don't be too hard on yourself. Right, let's get started. I want to talk about your book, Drop the Struggle. Alison, tell us a little bit about it. You know, what were your motivations for writing it? Tell us about what it is and who it's for.
Thank you. The simple answer about motivation for is Jenna said to me, shall we write a book? And I resisted for a little while. But the real answer is we wrote a book because both Jenna and I work with an underpinning to our work as sports psychologists of something called acceptance and commitment therapy. And I certainly had felt like, until I found that as part of my practice as a sports psychologist, I'd always been sticking plasters on athletes. It felt like I'd kind of got a solution that kind of stayed there for a bit, but they'd need another plaster after a while. And actually working with acceptance and commitment is something that kind of gives a long-term solution for athletes and for coaches. And it's just great to be able to get that out there in the world through writing it down in a book and letting the rest of the world share what Jenna and I know. So that was where it came from for me. Jenna, I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think, pretty similar. I'd sort of come across ACT and I suppose was using it a bit unknowingly in my own life and sport, and then started working with it in my work as a sports psychologist and saw how impactful it was. And the thought came about, well, could we spread this a little bit further? So ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, is used a lot in sort of clinical settings, and it's becoming more and more something that sports people are realizing can be transformative for them as well. So yeah, just wanted to get word out there a little bit more about the fact that there's a different way, I suppose. There's a different way to do sports psychology, and hoping that it will help as many people as possible.
Yeah, and I think you look at the topic and you read the book, and I think you're right. It's certainly not mainstream in in sports settings, but it certainly makes a lot of sense. I think of talks you do with parents, and you hear phrases like you listen to podcasts and embrace failure. I'm not a big fan of that concept. Whoever wants to embrace failure, I certainly don't as a person or as a sports parent, but I do like the acceptance and the normalizing of some of the things that we see and go on. And I know that this will be a big area of interest for parents, because the most popular session we get asked to deliver is generally around, how do we manage disappointment with our kids? How do we help them move on when things aren't working? And what can we do to help support them? Jenna, what were your biggest takeaways, do you think, from sort of researching and writing the book, and certainly with your sports hat on, as you were writing, what did what were your light bulb moments, I guess?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think what the process of writing did for me, and I think probably Alison as well, was just help to kind of consolidate a lot of the thoughts that I had in my mind. Our minds are just generally a kind of jumbled up mixture of lots of different thoughts, and the process of writing meant that I had to think about how it all links together, how to get that across in a coherent way, which then of course helps my thoughts to become more coherent. It's helped me in my sort of one-to-one sessions with clients, taking them on a bit more of a clearer journey, I suppose. And in terms of, I think there's so many, ACT involves a lot of exercises, metaphors, kind of fun ways to approach your mind. And there was so many that we wanted to put in the book. There's so many out there. And I suppose as we were doing it, Alison would share one that really worked for her, and I would think, that doesn't work quite for me, and then I'd share one, and Alison wouldn't think that would work for her. So it did definitely make me realize that there is no one right answer. I obviously knew that before, but it's just made it really clear that everybody's really different. And what I hope from this book is that people take one or two or three sort of key things from it that just change something for them. And recognizing that not everything works for everyone, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant point you raised then. Sort of people who listen to this podcast and certainly listen to our work, they'll be jumping around in celebration with you that there isn't one size fits all, despite this narrative that we see peddled on media and people claiming that there is one only unique way. That is certainly not the case. And I think that the bits I liked in the book, I think you're right, is that you left it very open for people to look at it through their lens and apply, I guess, the theory to their lives, which I think is ultimately the key to all of it.
Yeah, for sure. And I was thinking about the parenting aspect as well, and how if you've got multiple children, something that might work for one of your children, you might think, well, that's a guarantee to work for another one, and actually you find that child is very different, and so maybe a different approach is needed. And at the heart of it is just understanding your child, isn't it? Or for us, understanding the client and the person in front of us. So I think that's key to it as well.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I've got two children, and they are completely different. Some of the ways I have to give feedback and the timings of when I'm able to do things and how I have to go about it look very, very different. Thankfully, my daughter came second, and she tells me how it's going to be and what approach I have to take. And, it's fascinating. I can't even talk to her about her sport in front of her mum or her brother. It's just a no-go area. But she will talk very openly and honestly when it is just me and her. And if I want to be slightly critical or want to say something that I've got to say or feel like I need to say, she's got no issue with that in that environment. If I do it in the wrong place at the wrong time, however, well, we'll be setting off World War III.
Yeah, really good example. And I think that demonstrates pretty well that just working out what works for your child is the key to it.
Yeah.
Alison, Yeah, I was going to say one of the things for me that was a light bulb, and again, that came through the writing process between Jenna and I, was how easily in sport and outside of sport too, but particularly in sport, we use the word negative. Don't have negative thoughts. And we went backwards and forwards, Jenna. We realized as we read through our manuscript how often we'd use that term negative. And actually, you'll notice that's not in the book. We purposely have taken that out, recognizing that thoughts are just thoughts, feelings are just feelings. Again, we're so conditioned to think that, if we're sad or we're anxious or, some of those emotions, they're negative emotions. And we've gone, no, they're actually quite normal emotions in a sports setting. When they're normal in life too, and in a sports setting, when something's important to you and you've got something that might be a bit difficult or you haven't done before or is important to you, you're going to have those thoughts, difficult thoughts. You're going to have difficult emotions come up. So that was a bit of a light bulb moment for me. Just realizing how often that would come out of our mouths or it came out in our writing. So again, as a parent, it's one I thought, oh, that's interesting, isn't it? I wonder how many times I have two grown-up children who've been through sport. I wonder how many times I use that or, got them to think that an emotion that they experienced was a negative one. So that was a light bulb moment for me in terms of writing the book together with Jenna.
Yeah, how do you think we reframe that? I think sometimes we do think that, if our children feel anxious or they're nervous or they're worked up, that doesn't have to be a negative, because we know that can lead us to performing, even better at the sort of optimum state. Are we having to work with our kids just like you do throughout the book about being able to separate what's real and what are thoughts? Is that ultimately at the heart of this?
Yeah, I think also just loosening the notion that we think that we can control our thoughts or we think that we can control our emotions, because we can't. So if we sat here and said, okay, let's just be silent for a moment and not think anything, I guarantee that we will be thinking something within 10 seconds. There'll be a thought popping in like, oh, isn't this boring? Or, oh, I can't do this. Or, oh, so I've just heard. Yeah, suddenly. And it's the same with our emotions. If we think that we can still our body and not experience emotions, we can't. And it just really, that's why we've called the book Drop the Struggle to an extent. It just loosens that agenda of having to fight it. If an emotion comes up, it comes up. If a thought comes up, it comes up. Don't have to label it, just have to notice it and decide what to do next. So to me, it's a really freeing way of being an athlete or parenting an athlete in that respect, because we don't have to struggle with it any longer.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Jenna, from a parental point of view on, we probably know our kids better than anybody else. We probably can see when they may be feeling certain things. Some are obviously better at hiding it than others. Any thoughts on how we can sort of lean into those conversations, talk to them about it? Is it about giving them the space to talk and communicate well with us?
I think it actually is. Yeah, I think there's a few things. As Alison was talking there, I was thinking, one thing is just to become a little bit more conscious, and you don't want to be second guessing yourself the whole time, but just become a little bit more conscious of maybe some of the phrases that you use. Don't be nervous is an absolute classic, and we all say it. And I find myself, saying to my little one, don't cry or don't be sad, but in doing that, I'm telling them that is an emotion that they shouldn't be having or that they don't want to have. And that's sort of then reinforcing. And actually, like you say, if we just provide that space to go, how are you feeling? And they say nervous, and you say, well, that's part of sport. And yeah, so the first thing is sort of just trying to catch ourselves when we're trying to deny an emotion, I suppose. And then also, like your example earlier, just finding those opportunities, and it might be, in the car on the way to or back from a sports game. It might be actually the day later or even the week later, once that child has had a time to process it. It might be that the morning of an event, they hate talking about it and they just want to be distracted. It might be that they really enjoy a conversation to get their mind focused. So having that, and the thing I think that we don't do enough is have that conversation, with your child about what would you like? What does help? If I'm standing on the sideline, do you like encouragement? Do you like silence? Before in the car on the way there, do you like music? Or just having that conversation as to, and they might not know the answer straight away. It might take a little bit of time for them to figure it out. But just by asking that question, you then sort of open up that opportunity for them to go, actually, I've been thinking about it and I think this would really help me. So I think the power of questions and open questions, allowing the child to have a think and explore is really powerful.
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely vital, isn't it? And that bit about working with our children is really important. It goes back to that bit that not everybody's the same. I mean, the car journey to and from competitions are a huge part of our work. We've really sort of tried to drill into that. But everybody's different, getting ready to go to competition. Some people may like silence. Some people may like music on their playlist. Some people may like to talk about the sport. Some people may like to talk about anything other than the sport. And you've got to understand your kids. I guess what we don't want to end up in is the stage I ended up in with a group of athletes and parents. We did a workshop together where I asked the 15-year-old boy, what do you want from mum on your way to competition? And in front of this packed room, he said, quite honestly, I wish she wasn't there. Oh my goodness. Well, I'm stood at the front of this session. I'm thinking, how am I getting out of this one? I was getting hot under the collar and I was saying, there must be something good about mum. And luckily the boy said, oh yeah, best mum in the world the rest of the week. And what had become really apparent was that mum was turning on the ignition on the way to competition and she just didn't shut up. Yeah, and it becomes so obvious to him that she was worked up, she was anxious, she was nervous, and she was, putting all of those anxieties onto him, and it was beginning to have a negative impact on his performance. They went away and the music's on now and they don't talk about it, and they've agreed they're not going to talk for the first half an hour afterwards because he wants that time to process it. And then he said, but then mum, I'll answer any questions that you've got. Now that's an individual tale, but that isn't going to be the same for everybody. What are your thoughts, Alison, around some of the stuff Jenna's set off there?
Oh gosh, it takes me all sorts of places, actually. I think sometimes in working with athletes, what I notice is the hardest thing is for them sometimes to be able to, and he sounds a remarkable young 15-year-old young man, is to be able to verbalize what they're thinking. And sometimes that's the work I might do with an athlete for the first couple of sessions is, can they notice and be able to say out loud and feel it's okay to say out loud what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And sometimes that's quite hard for them. They go, I don't know what I'm thinking. And it takes quite a lot of work sometimes to give them the space to label them, to enable them to be able to say, yeah, actually, I'm thinking this and this is what I need, or I'm feeling this, and not feel ashamed that they're feeling something. So as you said before, that these thoughts come with sport, being nervous, being anxious, being worried, that feeling sad, feeling ashamed that something's happened, feeling guilty that something's happened, all of these emotions that we've said are negative, but being able to verbalize them. So yeah, I'd say that's work that we need to do as parents, is give them the space and just gently keep asking the question till they can verbalize it themselves.
Yeah, do you think that's the key? I mean, I think, I've always put myself out there for my own failings. I think for a lot of us, even being able to talk in the terms you're talking can be really difficult. And I think there'll be a lot of parents who maybe don't role model that as well and actually say it's all right to be nervous, it's all right to be upset, it's all right to be worked up, so that it is normal, because we tend to hold on to it to not to be Superman, but portray this image that we think we need to portray. There'll be a lot of parents who'll be listening, will be saying, oh my goodness, I just won't be able to get anything out of my kids. Some say to me, I asked them a question and I'm lucky if I get a grunt, or how was that for you? I was fine. And that's the end of the dialogue. And I know the open questions do it, but it can be really hard to establish that. Any thoughts on what we can do?
Absolutely. I mean, one way is to engage the young person in different ways to verbalize things. So can they draw it? Can they have a picture of it? So to be creative in that. But probably the most important thing is for the parent to model it. If the parent doesn't say, because certainly as a parent from my end, I was always quite nervous watching my children do their sport when they were in important situations. So for me to go, oh, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking. And having parents who can show the vulnerability, can show that they have a mixture of, sometimes they're happy, sometimes they're sad, sometimes they're thinking they can do something, sometimes they don't, modeling all of that for your children, I think is a really important thing, because that gives the child the space to be able to go, okay, yeah, I'm not the only one here. Mom thinks this, dad thinks this. So often I've worked with young people where the parents are modeling something very different. It's really hard then for the child to open up if the parent isn't willing to be open too.
Yeah, it's a real challenge, and I think that leads on probably particularly around how we create our own narrative of what's negative and what's deemed as failure. I said at the beginning that's probably one of those key topics, but actually a large part of failure, disappointment, negativity is we can do an awful lot by how we frame that in the home environment and how we talk about and perceive all of those things. How do we help our young people around perceived failure and disappointment? What do you think we can do as parents based on some of your work or what you've seen?
This is where Jenna and I are giving each other telepathic looks. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, go on, Alison.
Okay. It's such a thorny topic. One thing that came to mind, and I think sometimes I think failure is such a black and white thing, and actually, performance, and we see in a very black and white type of area is success or failure. And some of that comes from the labels we attach to our children and their performance so I noticed myself when my daughter was 14, she won a national championships in the sport that she was doing. And I noticed myself giving her a label of, oh, so you're a national champion. And I suddenly wished I could suck the words back into my mouth as they'd come out of my mouth, because I realized I'd put something onto her in terms of success and failure. Was actually, so she'd won a national championship. She'd done some great rowing. She was a rower, some great rowing. She'd worked really hard with her partner. They'd worked well together. She'd committed herself all the way to the end. I could have focused on all of those inputs as opposed to giving her a label. And again, part of the acceptance and commitment underpinning is holding loosely who we think we are as an athlete, or as we think our children are as well, which is quite a hard concept to get your head around, that they're not the kind of content of the labels that we give them, that they're the person, they're the doing. So actually it's about, to me, you can change completely the whole notion of failure. It doesn't really exist. It's just a setback. It's just something that's not taking you in the direction of where you want to go. And if you can loosen your child from all the labels that you give them about being something or not being something, it opens up stuff. And actually what you're interested in is the effort they put in, the curiosity, whether they take the actions that they want to do that move them towards where they want to be. So yeah, that's certainly one of my perspectives.
Yeah, I definitely agree. How are we defining success and failure? I had one parent who would always say to me after a game, did you play well? And the other parent would always say to me, did you enjoy it? And for me, that sort of just sums it up in terms of, one parent was much more interested in whether I scored a goal or whether I helped the team to win, or, maybe who was watching and if it helped me get selected for the next thing, with the best intentions, I'm sure. And the other parent would really only really care about if I enjoyed it. And thinking back now, sort of, I valued, I suppose, both, because there's, I felt a driving force from one parent, but I felt unconditional, doesn't matter how you played, as long as you had a good time, from another parent. And both were quite helpful, but I suppose in terms of how I felt, and in safety and comfort and willingness to be okay with not playing my best, was knowing that actually enjoying it, seeing my friends, some of the qualities that Alison just spoke about, was success as well. And having a day out on a hockey pitch rather than sitting in front of the TV, that's a successful day. Connecting, laughing, doing something active, all of that is success as well, even if I played rubbish or we lost, which is sort of how we probably define failing. There's lots of successes in that day as well. So maybe I think helping their children to see that if it was a disaster in terms of the result, there will be other successes in that day. We might just have to work a little bit harder to find them.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think go on, Alison. You go on, add to that.
I was going to say one of the chapters in the book is chapter 5, I think, which is about doing what matters. And we talk about values in there. And that's not something that in sport we often spend a lot of time with athletes doing, is what's important to you? What's the direction you want to go in? What are those kind of key qualities that you want to exhibit? And I think that's what Jen is alluding to, is that we can always move towards doing those things. So if one of your values is courage, can you step forward in a game and play with courage? If one of your values is trust, can you trust yourself to mark your opponent, or trust your team member? If one of them's care, can you play in a way that's considerate of other people? You can always do all of those things, always, through your competition, through your training, through your practice, and so on. And that's a much better way of also evaluating your performance, going, did I live my values? Did I move towards being how I want to be as an athlete, and as a person in this world? And that's much more sustainable, and it's not pass or fail, because every day, every moment, you can do those things. So that's the way I like to work now with athletes, to go, that's success. Did you live your values? Did you move towards being who you want to be, rather than, as Jenna said, did you win the match? Did you score a goal, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely fantastic advice. I think more and more, I think we're heading in the right direction with all of this. I spend a lot of time with parents talking about, are we helping our kids understand why they're winning, why they're being successful? And it's actually all the building blocks that hold it together. You talked about values. I talk about some of the things that underpin whether they're going to be brilliant people or brilliant on the sports field, because you're going to need that, even if you wanted your children to be a professional, even if they're probably not going to be, because sport's so messy and so many uncontrollables that there is so much more value to what your kids are doing if you're able to be explicit about it and talk about it. And you've raised the prime challenge that parents have, we're programmed by society, where sport's massively powerful. We celebrate winning, we see losing as failure. And lots of parents who, with no sporting backgrounds, often just copy what they see on the TV. So it's no surprise that many of the questions that they do ask the children are the ones that you talked about. Probably the 3 most popular questions asked by parents to their kids are, did you win? Did you score? And were you the best player? And how did you compare to everybody else? Yet the kids tell you that comparison's the worst thing in the world. Now, unraveling that is quite hard, because it's almost like a programmed question, isn't it, for parents? I did it the other week. I was away somewhere. First question, did you win? Now, it's not because it's the only thing I value, but actually that's what I led with. And you, a bit like you, Alison, you think, oh, you're an absolute idiot. You talk about this and then you've just fallen straight into the trap yourself.
And it's not that there's anything wrong with that question per
No.
se, but what that question is saying to me as the child is, what my parent values is whether I won or not. That's just how it comes across, even if it's not, it's a part of it. But yeah, we can tell a lot from the questions that we get asked, can't we?
Yeah, and I think with that one as well, what in a lot of cases, and a lot of parents are brilliant when you can admit your own vulnerability and your own failings. They also say, "God, yeah, what a nightmare." I do that. I mean, some of them admitted, if the children answer no to each of those, that's the end of the chat till next week. That those three questions, Charles says, "Oh, well, that's it." And as you say, what we're valuing or what we're telling the kids are valued doesn't look particularly good till somebody points it out to you. I always think grandparents are the best for this. Because a lot of the kids say, I love watching my grandparents watching us because they're just genuinely happy and want us to do well. But they're definitely the worst for questions. Whenever I put mine on the call at the weekend, first question is, did you win? And then the second one is, did you score? When you've got children who are defender, one who's a defender as well, the chances of them scoring, there's not going to be much success on that question.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's that's a grandparents thing. So we've talked about, I guess, the types of question. We've talked about helping our kids have the right values. We've talked about bringing to life some of those other parts of the sporting experience. And I guess, your chapter that we've just touched on, except being uncomfortable. I definitely prefer this to embracing failure. When our kids are upset and they're disappointed and they're maybe tearful, maybe they're crying, and we're desperate to right the wrongs of the world, which is what we do as parents, any thoughts on what we try to do or what we attempt to do, no matter how difficult that may be?
I wanted to pass to Jenna because she wrote this part of the book. I'd say one of the things is to teach our children how to hold themselves gently, to self-soothe, to have compassion. I know, Jenna, do you want to speak a bit? You wrote that part of the
I mean, I think it's as much accepting as parents, isn't it? And if we can accept as parents that all of these feelings are inevitable, and sport comes with, playing badly, not getting selected, getting injured, all of those things. We know with almost, 100% certainty that these things are going to happen. But yet when they do, we don't want them. We don't want them to happen. And of course, what acceptance is about is not, you don't want these sort of, let's quote unquote, negative feelings or thoughts, and you don't want these unhelpful ones. You don't want these bad things to happen. But acceptance is recognizing that they will, and that is a part of it. And if we can do that as parents, you then, like we talked about earlier, you're then modeling that for your child as well. I think one of the most powerful things is, Alison talked about, that sort of space is listening. And the reason why open questions, did you win? It's a closed question. It's eliciting a yes or no answer. How was that from your perspective today is an open question. They then have to think about things. They have to reflect on it to answer that question. And it's tempting, isn't it, when someone comes in with an answer to say, oh, but don't worry because of this or that, or come in with a sort of counter. And actually acceptance is, leave it there. Like, as much as we want to fix it, that's just the way it was today, and that's okay. And maybe there's some things that you might come back to think about doing differently next time. It's not excluding that, but I suppose in that moment when your child is articulating something, is just being there to listen rather than to add in with a counter or a but, or and that then promotes acceptance, doesn't it? Because we're just allowing things to be as they are.
Yeah. And teach them to respond in a way that they would, if you say to them, how are you talking to yourself right now? And they usually go, well, I'm being really critical and I'm beating myself up. And by saying, well, what would you say to your friend? They go, well, I'd put an arm around my friend. So teaching them to put an arm around themselves and go, actually, okay, hey, be all right tomorrow, or it's okay to feel that, or here, let me just give you a hug, kind of thing. I think teaching them to learn to do that for themselves, as well as you as a parent doing that to them too, going, hey, It's okay. Yeah, I think that's a great skill to teach your children.
We'd never talk to our friends like we talk to ourselves, would we? So that's a nice one to help children understand that we are with ourself 100% of the time. And if we are, continually critical to ourselves, it can be quite exhausting.
Yeah, I think there's some amazing points in there, I guess, from a parental point of view. One of the things I found being around young people and doing odd bits of sessions with them, they almost need to understand that a lot of those things you're talking about are normal. Whenever you show them what journeys look like and what are a normal part that they can expect, as you say, Jenna, not because we necessarily want them, we just know that they're going to crop up at some point. We can predict it. There's quite a lot at the moment a few have recently have sort of said an awful lot of thank yous. And I've sort of said, well, what do you mean, thank you? And they're saying, oh, well, thanks for telling us that it's not always going to be perfect. Thanks for telling us that it's not always going to be right. Thanks for telling us that we're all right to mess it up and fail. And this is what they're saying back. And you wonder how young people are growing up with that narrative. And I think then, God, we probably go down a massive rabbit warren about everything to do with society, technology, modern day parenting and everything else. But it is a real challenge, isn't it? Because some of the things that we know hold human beings together and some of the things that may lead to performance actually probably require us to fight an awful lot with what we're seeing in wider society at the moment. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Fundamentally, parents who are listening to this podcast care. They care about trying to get it right. And that is the intent behind that is got to be, one of the most important things. And we're going to get it wrong in all sorts of ways. And I certainly feel very ill-equipped to sort of advise on parenting at this point. But I do know that we will get it wrong. But if I care about trying to get it right, that's at the heart of it. And social media, tech, and all of these things that our children are facing. If I'm there in a supportive way, trying to do the right thing, trying to care, I think that's got to be one of the most important things.
And I would say also encouraging your club coach to facilitate some of these conversations that we're having right now, so that children go, oh, I'm not the only one, am I? I've always watched you on the pitch and you look like you never bothered about anything, and you are. It's that kind of conversation to show that in the environment they're in, they're not the only ones who might, think some thoughts or feel some stuff.
Yeah, and we want to help these young people, talk about emotional control and being able to perform, and we need to help them with that. It's always sad watching the sort of, fully blown tantrum on stuff that isn't actually that big a deal, and you desperately just want to help those young people. Just say it's all right, it's not the end of the world. And I think we've probably all got some work to do around our sporting environments in how we frame, as you say, some of these conversations we're talking about, because we've got quite good at the technical, tactical stuff. It's all the other stuff around the environment that we've probably got some work to do, I think.
And I think the other thing that's really key with our ACT underpinning is refocusing and going, okay, the thoughts and the feelings we don't get to control. They're like buses passing by, they're like leaves on a stream, they're like the weather that comes through. Sometimes it's rainy, sometimes it's cloudy, sometimes it's sunny, and we do get to choose how we act. So I think that's what a beautiful focus of ACT is, going, okay, the stuff going on in your head is going to go on, give it space, don't accept it, make space for it, don't hold on to it too tightly, put it in perspective. And no, we're in sport, and sport is about doing stuff. You don't get good at sport, you don't win games, you don't perform well if you don't do stuff. So let's think about what's important to you to do and go do it. And I think that's the lovely counterbalance here, that you're not just spending lots of time thinking about your emotions, you're noticing them, and you're noticing where they detract from you performing, You don't need to fight with them, but you can then focus on what you need to do. And that's what I love about ACT. It's so, action oriented about, okay, let's now go and do the things that we need to do.
Yeah,
and that emotional storm that you spoke about. Sorry, Gordon. Yeah, the sort of tantrum or the fully fledged, we refer to it as a bit of an emotional storm going on in your mind. Again, in this philosophy that is okay. That in itself is not a problem. It's when you start slamming your racket or shouting or the behavior that follows that then becomes. So actually, it's if this emotional storm is going on, for sure, let's teach you some strategies to help you manage, or deal with or cope with that. But then, as Alison said, it's who is the, going back to values, who's the person you want to be, who's the player you want to be, and acting sort of in line with that. So, keeping my chin up and my shoulders back, even if I've just let a goal in, or even if I've just made a mistake. Body language, actions and behaviors. I think that's a really tangible focus.
Yeah, I think your action piece, and that's a nice thing about the book. It isn't just theory. It's like, well, actually, what can we do about it? I think you read an awful lot of things, don't you, where people say, well, here's the problem and there's no solutions. And I certainly like that in the book. I mean, that emotional control one's a really interesting one. And I sort of completely changed my view on it after speaking to Steve Magnus, who wrote the book Do Hard Things, and he was part of the Nike Oregon project with Mo Farah and Alberto Salazar. He came on the podcast. And I used to have this theory that, okay, I didn't mind people being a little bit upset by it because, it clearly shows that they care or that it's important to them, and all of those sort of thoughts that we maybe grew up with. And he said, yeah, but Gordon, you're looking at this all wrong, because when you're seeing those behaviors, he was of the view, well, they haven't learned to emotionally control themselves yet. And he said, actually, there should be a conversation there. Yes, they can care. Yes, they can do. But it goes back to what you say. Actually, how do we want to be? How are we accepting how we feel? And what can we actually do to keep a lid on some aspects of that?
And I think we'd say there's a fine line between controlling your emotion. And I think Jenna and I would both go, from our underpinning of psychology, we go, can't do that, and can control the action that follows. So it's like a really subtle, like the feeling of rage that comes up when you've missed a point. Let that feeling come up, make space for it, and absolutely, the next thing that you do, you are in control of.
Yeah.
But it's the action, not the internal kind of emotion and thought that you're not in control of. And that, to me, going right back to where you asked me the question, for me, that was the sticking plaster as a psychologist. I felt I was asking athletes to stick on. Control your emotions, control your thoughts, only think positive things, only feel positive emotions, using those words in inverted commas. And as soon as I learned ACT and realized, okay, don't have to fight all of that, but I do have to decide what I do next. Do I step up and mark my partner? Do I step up and kick that ball straight? Do I focus on what I need to do? Absolutely, you're in control of all of that. We do a lovely exercise. Go on. It's one of Jenna's lovely exercises, the disobey on purpose exercise.
Yeah, so if you would say to someone, for example, if they're sat down, you'd say, okay, think in your mind as clearly as you can. I can't stand up. I can't stand up. I can't stand up. Repeat that over and over again. Get it so clear in your mind, crystal clear. And then you just ask them to stand up. And of course, it's not, people think it's some weird psychology experiment, but it's not. You stand up and you see how easy it is to stand up, even though you had this really clear thought in your mind that you can't do that. And it's this sort of concept that actually we don't have to believe all of our thoughts. And there'll be, so many thoughts that we have when we're playing sport. I can't do this, or don't mess up, or, this isn't, or whatever, all these things that are really unhelpful. And actually the realization that we don't have to listen to them all. We can just let that one pass. As Alison said, cloud in the sky, let it pass, it will pass. And so, but focus on the actions and behavior. And that is once you get your head around that concept, it can be so transformative, sport and life. The fact that we're not, wedded to, and all of our thoughts aren't true, and we don't have to believe them all, can just lighten the load so much. So yeah.
I think, do you know what? I think that's just the most wonderful place to end, because I think we've summarized it beautifully. We talked about lots of different bits, but that crystal clear idea of acknowledging that the thoughts are there, that those emotions are going to be there, but then actually what we do next is the key to it, and being able to, we're in control of that, and we can reset ourselves and do the next things well. I just think it's a really big message, and both of you, thank you so much for giving up your time, and in many ways talking about a topic that I think for sports parents is a real challenge. And hopefully we've tried to make some sense of what we can do to help our young people around this. We want them all to thrive, and I'm very grateful for the time you've given me, but also for creating this book, which we'll certainly recommend to people as part of the show notes when it's released. So thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening. Check us out at parentsinsport.co.uk.